truth and nothing but the truth? If so, answer in the affirmative. Right? May be seated. Let the record reflect that they all answered in the affirmative. Let me introduce our second panel of witnesses. Anthony P. Placido is the Assistant Administrator for Intelligence, Drug Enforcement Administration, U.S. Department of Justice. Welcome. Mr. Kumar Kibble, Deputy Director of the Office of Investigations, United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Welcome. Mr. Todd Owen, Acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Office of Field Operations, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Mr. William Hoover, Assistant Director of Field Operations, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive, United States Department of Justice. And Mr. J. Robert McBrien, Associate Director of Investigation of the Enforcement Office of Foreign Assets Control, Department of the Treasury. Gentlemen, it is our committee policy, of course, that 5 minutes for your presentation, and then you allow us an opportunity to raise questions with you. So why don't we just go right down the line? I guess Mr. Owens, you first, and then just go right down the line that way. Make it a lot easier.
Good afternoon, Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, distinguished members of the committee. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the efforts that U.S. Customs and Border Protection is undertaking to secure our nation, and I'm pleased to be here with my colleagues from ICE, DEA, ATF, and OFAC. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Congress for its continued support of the mission and people of CBP. Among the numerous priorities that were recognized in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, Congress provided CBP with $680 million for greatly needed improvements to our aging infrastructure at our ports of entry, to enhance our tactical communications equipment, and upgrade our non-intrusive inspection technologies. This funding will allow CBP to more efficiently meet our twin goals of border security and facilitation. CBP has taken significant steps to protect Americans from the many threats that faced our nation. This afternoon, I would like to focus my remarks on the violence along the southwest border, particularly in regards to the outbound enforcement activities occurring at the ports of entry. The campaign of violence being waged by drug cartels in Mexico remains a major concern. Illegal drugs, money, and weapons flow both ways across our border and link the United States and Mexico in this battle. In response to this threat, the Department of Homeland Security has implemented a Southwest Border Security Strategy, and CBP's Office of Field Operations is responsible for implementing this strategy at our ports of entry. We in CBP Field Operations have taken significant action on the Southwest border, have enhanced our outbound enforcement efforts through the deployment of additional manpower, equipment, and technology. On a regular and recurring basis, teams of CBP officers, CBP Border Patrol agents, special agents from ICE and other federal agencies, along with our state and local law enforcement partners, are now conducting outbound inspections at our ports of entry with a focus on interdicting firearms and currency heading into Mexico. CBP's mobile response teams are also quickly utilized to shift personnel between the ports of entry to further disrupt outbound smuggling efforts. These personnel are supported by non-intrusive inspection equipment, which allows us to quickly scan a conveyance for the presence of anomalies which may indicate contraband of some sort. CBP Field Operations currently deploys 227 large-scale inspection systems to our ports of entry, 91 of which are along the southwest border. Many of these systems are mobile and which can and are being used in our outbound interdiction efforts as well. And CBP is again grateful for the $100 million in stimulus funding, which will allow us to upgrade our NII systems. We're also deploying dual detection canines, which are trained to detect both currency and firearms. We are adding additional canine assets to the southwest border throughout the summer as these teams come out from the academy in Front Royal, Virginia. And these detection tools will again allow our officers to quickly scan the southbound traffic looking for bulk cash, currency, and firearms. And we are seeing the success of these increased outbound interdiction efforts. Since CBP began these initiatives with our partners on March 12th, we have seized more than $15.8 million in illicit currency destined for Mexico. We are also pursuing activities which increase support and collaboration with our Mexican counterparts. at U.S. and Mexican border crossings, joint operations with Mexican Customs have begun, and more are planned in an effort to better coordinate the inspection of travelers and cargo leaving the U.S. heading into Mexico. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, members of the committee, thank you for your support that CBP has had in meeting many of our border security responsibilities. I thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon and be happy to address any of your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Owens. Mr. Kibble.
Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of Secretary Napolitano and Assistant Secretary Morton, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss ICE's role in securing the border through the investigation and enforcement of the nation's immigration and customs laws. As the primary investigative agency within DHS, ICE targets transnational criminal networks and terrorist organizations that might exploit potential vulnerabilities at our borders. Our partnerships are essential to this effort. ICE recently strengthened two of these crucial partnerships by renegotiating agreements with the DEA and the ATF. These agreements will improve and enhance information sharing and promote effective coordination. The violence along our southwest border requires a comprehensive and collaborative effort. On March the 24th, the Departments of Homeland Security, Justice, and State announced the Southwest Border Initiative designed to crack down on Mexican drug cartels. This initiative was augmented by the recently released 2009 National Southwest Border Counter-Narcotic Strategy. Since the March announcement, we have seen significant increases in seizures of drugs and currency compared to the same time period in 2008. During the period between the March announcement and June 23rd of this year, ICE and CBP together have increased narcotics and U.S. currency seizures by over 40%. ICE continues to work with its federal partners to collaborate in various ways. For example, in 2005, DHS created the Border Enforcement Security Task Force. The 15 BESTs are a series of ICE-led multi-agency task forces that identify, disrupt, and dismantle criminal organizations posing significant threats to border security. Since 2005, the BESTs have reported over 4,000 criminal arrests and seized over 200,000 pounds of narcotics, over 2,500 weapons, and over 370,000 rounds of ammunition, including $26 million in U.S. currency and monetary instruments. One recent success story is exemplified through a joint BEST investigation between ICE, ATF, and the El Paso Police Department, which led to the indictment of 4 individuals attempting to purchase and illegally export weapons and ammunition out of the United States. The weapons they attempted to purchase and smuggle included 300 AR-15 rifles, 300 short-barrel .223 caliber rifles, 10 Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifles, 2 40-millimeter grenade machine guns, and 20 handguns with silencers, as well as a large amount of ammunition. The firearms would have had a total street value of over $500,000. Given the success of the BEST model, ICE has shifted investigators to these task forces and doubled the number of agents working on BESTs along the southwest border, from 95 to 190. This greatly expands our ability to work with state and local law enforcement on cartel-related crime occurring on the U.S. side of the border. A large number of weapons recovered in Mexico's drug war smuggled illegally into Mexico from the United States. Clearly, stopping this flow must be an urgent priority, and ICE is uniquely positioned to address this challenge. In June 2008, ICE, along with CBP and other federal, state, and local partners, launched Operation Armas Cruzadas. Since its inception, Armas Cruzadas has resulted in the seizure of 1,600 weapons, more than $6.4 million, and over 180,000 rounds of ammunition, and the arrest of 386 individuals. In addition to addressing weapons smuggling, ICE has partnered with CBP through Operation Firewall to combat the illegal movement of cash across the southwest border. Since its inception, Firewall has resulted in the seizure of over $210 million, including over $65 million seized overseas and 475 arrests. ICE also recently established the Trade Transparency Unit with Mexico to identify cross-border trade anomalies, which are often indicative of trade-based money laundering schemes. Under this initiative, ICE and its partners in cooperating countries exchange import and export data and financial information. These efforts have led to more than $50 million in cash seized during the last fiscal year. We proactively attack groups engaged in human smuggling and trafficking by initiating investigations beyond the borders. ICE is a major participant in and supporter of the Interagency Human Smuggling and Trafficking Center, which targets human smugglers, traffickers, and terrorist travel facilitators. We've identified various methods and routes used by criminal networks to smuggle people into the U.S. To target these methods and routes, ICE, in partnership with DOJ, formed the Extraterritorial Criminal Travel Strike Force in June of 2006, combining our investigative, prosecutorial, and intelligence resources to target, disrupt, and dismantle foreign-based criminal travel networks. Complementary to the ECT program is the pivotal role ICE continues to play as a co-chair of the targeting project of the Interagency Working Group on Alien Smuggling. In conclusion, ICE is committed to working with this committee and Congress to address the significant challenges we face to secure the border through the enforcement of our nation's immigration and customs laws. I thank the committee for its support of ICE and our law enforcement mission, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kibble. Mr. Placido.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, Ranking Member Issa, I appreciate the opportunity to represent the views of the Drug Enforcement Administration on this important issue regarding the rise of criminality in Mexican cartels and their implications for U.S. national security.
Pull your mic just a little closer.
As the lead agency for enforcing the drug laws of the United States, DEA is keenly aware of the critical requirement to break the power and impunity of transnational crime groups such as the Mexican cartels. These groups not only supply enormous quantities of illicit drugs to our country with adverse consequences in terms of addiction, lost productivity, and related social costs, but left unchecked, threaten regional stability because they undermine respect for the rule of law, diminish public confidence in government institutions, and promote lawlessness through corruption, intimidation, and violence. The good news is that together with our highly committed and increasingly capable Mexican partners and the generous support of Congress through the Merit Initiative, we are bringing unprecedented pressure against these cartels and helping fortify Mexico's criminal justice system to assure that these gains can be sustained over time. The drug trade in Mexico has been rife with violence for decades. However, intentionally gruesome drug-related violence, kidnapping, torture, and murder have remained at elevated levels since President Calderon initiated his bold, comprehensive program to break the power of the cartels. And I believe they have distributed some of the photos that demonstrate the extent of that brutality.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent that they be placed in the record but not shown because they are literally too gruesome, I think, for open showing. I think the gentleman would agree.
Without objection.
Thank you.
So ordered.
Mexican cities along our southwest border, such as Juarez and Tijuana, have witnessed spectacular violence despite the fact that El Paso and San Diego are among some of the safest cities in America. Drug-related killings in Mexico have escalated from approximately 1,200 in 2006 to more than 6,200 in 2008, and during the first 6 months of this year, there have been approximately 3,600, putting it on par to exceed last year's numbers. In the past, the violence was largely confined to persons engaged in the drug trade, but there's been a disturbing new trend wherein Mexican military and law enforcement officials are being intentionally targeted by the cartels. Moreover, in an effort intended to break the will of the government of Mexico to confront these vicious criminals, the mutilated and decapitated bodies of the victims are frequently left with signs warning of even greater violence. Even if this carnage can be confined to Mexican territory, it has adverse consequences to U.S. national security. There is justifiable concern that the violence plaguing Mexico will spill across our border and have an even more pronounced effect on Americans. The U.S. Interagency has attempted to distinguish between the criminal-on-criminal violence that has always been associated with the drug trade and the new phenomenon of retaliatory violence against Mexican officials and institutions. Accordingly, we have defined spillover violence to entail deliberate attacks by the cartel on U.S. government personnel, whether in the U.S. or Mexico, innocent civilians in the U.S., or U.S. government facilities, including our embassies and consulates. Based on this definition, we have not yet seen a significant level of spillover violence. However, as you have heard, we must and are building contingency plans for the worst-case scenario. Moreover, I would reemphasize that even if confined to Mexico, the drug-related violence seriously undermines respect for the rule of law and degrades confidence in Mexican institutions. By extension, instability in Mexico has serious national security implications here at home, as well as adverse consequences in Central America and beyond. DEA continues to work in cooperation with its federal, state, local, and foreign counterparts to address these threats. DEA's organizational attack strategy is an attempt to systematically disrupt and dismantle the command and control elements of these criminal syndicates. Key to this strategy is sharing information and coordination with our counterparts through the Special Operations Division, the OCDETF Fusion Center, and the El Paso Intelligence Center. In Mexico, DEA has the largest U.S. law enforcement presence, and its partnership with the Calderon administration in mounting sustained attacks against these cartels. The disruption and dismantlement of these organizations, the denial of proceeds, and the seizure of their assets significantly impact the ability of these cartels to exercise influence and further destabilize the region. Projects Reckoning and Operation Accelerator are recent examples of this collaboration. While these collaborative operations are intended to break the power of the cartels, in the short term, they also exacerbate the violence in Mexico. Briefly, I'd also like to address an issue of concern that was recently highlighted by the GAO pertaining to collaboration and cooperation between ICE and DEA. As someone who began my career with then U.S. Customs Service, now ICE, I want to underscore the importance of cooperation in law enforcement and DEA's unwavering support for the recently signed Interagency Cooperation Agreement between DEA and ICE. Both Secretary Napolitano and Attorney General Holder have made clear that this agreement is the most efficient and effective way to promote interagency coordination and cooperation. The agreement addresses the concerns of both agencies without the need for legislative action by allowing the cross-designation of an unlimited number of ICE agents to employ Title 21 investigative authority, and also strengthens information sharing and coordination protocols. Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify and stand ready to answer questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Hoover.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Towns, Congressman Bilbray, and other distinguished members of the committee, I am William Hoover, Acting Deputy Director at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. On behalf of Acting Director Ken Melson, I am honored to appear before you today to discuss ATF's ongoing role of disrupting firearms from being illegally trafficked from the United States into Mexico and working to reduce the associated violence along the border. For over 30 years, ATF has been protecting our citizens and communities from violent criminals and criminal organizations by safeguarding them from the illegal use of both firearms and explosives. We are responsible for both regulating the firearms and explosives industries and enforcing the criminal laws relating to those commodities. ATF has the experience, expertise, and commitment to investigate and disrupt groups and individuals who obtain guns in the U.S. and illegally traffic them into Mexico in facilitation of the drug trade. The combination of ATF's crime-fighting expertise, specific statutory and regulatory authority, analytical capability, and strategic partnerships is used to combat firearms trafficking both along the U.S. borders and throughout our nation. We know we do not fight this battle alone. Last week, ATF hosted a violent crime and arms trafficking summit in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This conference was monumental in establishing a formal partnership between ATF and ICE. At this conference, a memorandum of understanding was signed by the leaders of both agencies, establishing how we will work together on investigations regarding firearms trafficking. This agreement also establishes a notification process that each agency will follow while conducting these investigations. ATF's strategy for disrupting the flow of firearms to Mexico through Project Gunrunner has referred over 882 cases for prosecution involving 1,838 defendants. Those cases include 415 for firearms trafficking, which involved 1,135 defendants, and an estimated 13,382 firearms. ATF has said that 90% of the firearms seized in Mexico and traced come from the United States. The GAO report that was published on June of 2009 concurred with our findings. We have established that the greatest proportion of firearms trafficked to Mexico originate out of the states along the southwest border. Additionally, trace data shows that traffickers are also acquiring firearms from other states as far east as Florida and as far north and west as Washington State. Additionally, Mexican officials have seen an increase in the number of explosive devices used in these violent attacks. ATF agents and explosives experts work with the Mexican military and law enforcement to identify and determine where these devices and components originate. Along the southwest border, ATF's Project Gunrunner includes approximately 148 special agents dedicated to investigating firearms trafficking on a full-time basis and 59 industry operations investigators responsible for conducting regulatory inspections of federally licensed gun dealers known as FFLs. We recently sent over 100 additional personnel to the Houston Field Division to support our effort against the trafficking of firearms to Mexico. In addition, ATF has received a total of $25 million in new funding in fiscal year 2009 and in fiscal year 2010 for Project Gunrunner. As the sole agency that regulates FFLs, roughly 7,000 of which are along the southwest border, ATF has the statutory authority to inspect and examine the records and inventory of licensees, looking for firearms trafficking trends and patterns, and revoking the license of those who are complicit in firearms trafficking. For instance, ATF used its regulatory authority to review the records of an FFL that received close to 2,000 firearms, removed their serial numbers, and trafficked them to Mexico with the aid of a co-conspirator located in Mexico. A key component of ATF's strategy to curtail firearms trafficking to Mexico is the tracing of firearms seized in both countries. Our analysis of this aggregate trace data can reveal trafficking trends and networks, showing where the guns are being purchased and who is purchasing them. Let me share an example of how trace data can identify a firearms trafficker. ATF's analysis of a trace data linked a man living in a U.S. city along the border to 3 crime guns recovered at 3 different crime scenes in Mexico. Further investigation uncovered that he was the purchaser of a 4th firearm recovered at yet another crime scene in Mexico, and that he had purchased over 100 AR-15 type receivers and 7 additional firearms within a short time span, using 9 different FFL wholesale distributors as sources for his guns. In April 2008, ATF seized 80 firearms from the suspect and learned that he was manufacturing guns in his home. He sold over 100 guns alone to an individual who is suspected of being linked to a cartel. Investigative leads are being pursued and charges are pending. Lastly, I would like to mention ATF's operational presence at the El Paso Intelligence Center located in El Paso, Texas. EPIC is certainly one of the most valuable tools for intelligence sharing and coordination in multi-agency efforts to curb violence and firearms trafficking activities along the southwest border. At EPIC, we operate what is known as the ATF Gun Desk. The mission of the Gun Desk is to identify and analyze all firearms and explosives-related data acquired and collected from law enforcement and open source. This would include Mexican military and law enforcement, and also U.S. law enforcement assets operating on both sides of the border. We at ATF will continue with our efforts along the southwest border and will harvest our partnerships with not only our law enforcement partners within the U.S., but will continue to work with the Mexican officials in Mexico to obtain more information to better understand the flow of firearms from our country into theirs. Chairman Towns, Congressman Bilbray, and other distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the men and women of ATF, I thank you and your staff for your continued support of our crucial work. With the backing of this committee, ATF can continue to fight violent crime in the nation's cities and on the border, making our nation even more conserved. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoover, for your testimony. Mr. McBrien.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bilbray, other members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the Treasury Department. I will try to compress this statement as we go through it for the interest of time and so that we can get into the questions and answers. The Office of Foreign Assets Control's mission is to enforce economic sanctions in support of U.S. foreign policy and national security. In the particular instance of Mexico, we're talking about using the tool of the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act, which Congress passed in 1999. The Kingpin Act has been used in responding to the threat in Mexico since the year 2000, when the first kingpins were named by, at that time, President Bush. And we've continued to use it since that time. So OFAC's involvement in the fight against the drug trafficking organizations in Mexico is not something new. It's something we've been doing even with the small resources that we have. The authorities delegated to OFAC are national security and foreign policy tools that provide power and leverage against a foreign country, regime, or non-state actors, such as foreign narcotics traffickers and terrorists. One of our most powerful instruments, the specially designated nationals list, or SDN list, is used to identify, expose, isolate, and disrupt or incapacitate our foreign adversaries with the intended result of denying them access to the U.S. financial and commercial system and immobilizing their resources. OFAC's authorities are administrative in nature, but for persons subject to U.S. jurisdiction, violating OFAC sanctions carries both civil and criminal penalties. Every year since the Kingpin Act was passed, the President of the United States has added more kingpins to the list. These kingpins are across the world. It's not only Mexico, although Mexico is roughly 50% of those that have been named. This year, President Obama moved from the usual June 1 date in which the statute asked that there be a report made and acted early, and on April 15th named 3 of the Mexican cartels that are currently at the center of much of the violence that's going on. We named the Los Zetas, the Sinaloa cartel, and La Familia La Michoacana. Then again, in June, we named more kingpins, except those were not involving Mexico. These that are referred to by OFAC as Tier 1 traffickers. While the President identifies the Tier 1 traffickers, OFAC has been delegated the authority to designate for sanctions those working for or on behalf of or owned or controlled by or materially assisting the Tier 1 traffickers. Now, this is the real meat of the counter-narcotic sanctions. These Tier 2s, which we also call derivative designations, include the money launderers, the family members complicit in narcotics trafficking activities, the criminal members of the organization, the transportation cells, the logistics, procurement, and communication cells that make up the financial and support networks of drug trafficking organizations. Since 1999, the President has identified 82 Tier 1 traffickers, 37 of which are Mexican. In that same time, OFAC has identified 251 Tier 2 designations in Mexico. In addition to that, under the program on which the Kingpin Act was conceptually based, which is our sanctions against Colombian traffickers under another authority, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, we have also, under the Colombian program, in recent times, named 30 Mexican entities or individuals who are also involved in the Colombia to Mexico part of the drug trade. So the total over these last several years is 288 persons, entities, and individuals that have been named by OFAC for the blocking of their assets and the prohibition on their activities. I'm going to skip through parts of this and just get down to some of the nitty-gritty here. I said at the outset that our objective is to identify and expose and isolate and delegitimize, immobilize, disrupt, dismantle, however we can do it, the drug trafficking organizations. And we do this by going after the heads of the organizations, key players in the organizations, and perhaps most important, and this again goes back to the meat of it, the networks, the key nodes, the choke points, the whole support structure that makes up a cartel, not just the people who are moving the drugs, but all the businesses, the infiltrations of the legitimate business world, the front companies that give them their backbone. Our objective is to go after that backbone and try to break it. Ultimately, we hope to be able to expose, halt, and even reverse the penetrations of the legitimate economy through our actions. At the same time that we're doing this, we're working collaboratively with all of our colleagues. All of the agencies that are at this table are working with OFAC in these projects. We have relied on and are heavily integrated with DEA and have been from the very beginning. I cannot say enough for the work that they have done to enable us to carry out our part of the program against the drug trafficking organizations in Mexico. At the same time that we're doing this with our colleagues, we have, since the Calderon administration came into power, been working very closely with the Mexicans on an ever-escalating basis, and we are continuing to do that. Yeah. I'd like to just conclude, if I may, with noting that the Kingpin Act provides a powerful mechanism for acting against the threat to the U.S. posed by foreign narcotics cartels, whether in Mexico or elsewhere. In the case of our southern neighbor, OFAC's employment of the Kingpin Act authorities provides a growing opportunity for partnership in combating the scourge of the drug trafficking organizations. It is a force multiplier. It presents opportunities not only in support of efforts by DEA and other U.S. criminal enforcement agencies.
I'm going to have to ask you to summarize. I'm going to have to ask you to summarize.
Yes, sir. That's actually what I'm doing right now, sir.
Yeah.
But we are also supporting Mexican authorities. It's an important element in achieving a unity of effort among U.S., federal, state,
what I'm really saying is your 5 minutes is up.
Local agencies. Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate that hint, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and we'd be glad to hear any questions you may have and try to answer them for you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you. Well, to the members, we have votes again, and of course, I understand there's 3 votes. What I'd like to do, if we could finish the panel, and because we do not know whether there'll be some procedural votes or not, so we're not sure as to how long it will take. So what I'd like to do, I would like to yield myself 2 minutes, and then yield the ranking member 2 minutes, and then yield you 2 minutes, and then we will be able to sort of finish up and without having to delay them for the next hour or so. All right, so let me begin by, first of all, asking, the average person has difficulty relating to the fact that we have problems in terms of the drug problems in Mexico. What do we say to the average person out there, that we're concerned about what's happening in Mexico? How do we really explain that? And you just either go at anyone, I guess Mr. Placido and Mr. Kimball probably, how do we explain to them our interests and our concerns?
Certainly. Sir, it's an excellent question, and I would answer it this way, that there is no country on the face of the earth that is probably more important to the United States than Mexico is to us. We share not only a common border, but immigration issues, trade, economy, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the water we use for irrigation and agriculture. We're closely intertwined. And the national security implications of corruption, intimidation, violence, and instability in Mexico threaten us gravely because of our integrated economy and the integrated nature of our societies. I think it is not only a source of drugs, much of the drugs that are consumed and abused in the United States, but instability south of our border creates problems on a much broader scale.
Yeah. Let me ask, yes, go ahead, Mr. Kimball.
Sir, the one thing I would add is it also, from the Homeland Security standpoint, represents a vulnerability in terms of our borders. And we have to be concerned that any smuggling network that can arbitrarily introduce contraband across our borders, we have to be concerned about them either knowingly or unknowingly facilitating national security, the introduction of national security threats into the homeland. So for those reasons, from the ICE perspective and the cross-border criminal network perspective, we need to leverage all of our efforts collectively to shut down these networks.
I yield to the gentleman from California.
I appreciate ICE's comment about anything and anyone who crosses the border without being checked is a potential threat. So we've got to tie that together. I'm going to ask about the MERIDA initiative, but up front, the laundering of the profits is something we don't talk enough about. And we have traditionally RICO provisions here, and anybody jump into this, the requiring viable identification at the time that any individual opens a bank account. The previous administration not only did not enforce it, but endorsed bank accounts being opened with less than secure identification. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Are we doing anything to shut down that opportunity to have thousands of bank accounts opened up to where we really don't know who opened those accounts. Are we going back and addressing these issues where we're requiring now a viable ID be issued before we open an account, the way it used to be before the previous administration? Anybody want to comment on that?
Mr. Bilbray, I'm from Treasury, but I have to admit that I'm not in a position to comment on that because that's not part of what the Office of Foreign Assets Control deals with.
I just tell you, in San Diego, it's a hot issue that you can go to any consulate, get a consulate card without any ID to prove that you are who you said you want to be. And not only were the banks allowing it, but they were condoned by the Bush administration at opening these accounts with no oversight to prove that this was a viable ID. Why have a law if we're not going to apply it to everybody? So I raise that. What are we doing with the Merida Initiative? I'm very concerned about two things. Anyone who participates in Mexico in our process, they and their families are going to be suspect. Is there anybody here who can talk? Can we talk about this openly and how we're cooperating and how we're training and how we're supplying Mexico to win the war in their soil before it gets to ours?
Certainly, sir. Excellent question. I think, as was said on the first panel, there was concern that I think the way it was characterized is we're one assassination away from having the Merida plan fail. I don't know that I'd go that far, but I would certainly say that the Mexican partners with whom we work are extraordinarily vulnerable for their participation with us and for their bold and decisive actions against the cartels. In response to that, there is a great deal of work going on, and under Merida, some of the things that are going on are executive protection plans and training for senior level officials. Of course, the vetting that's been discussed in terms of the integrity and the capability of the people that we work with. But there is also institution building, and I think that's the long-term piece of this, is that to build up and develop the courts and the prosecutor cadre so that they take on this problem internally in their own country and break the impunity of these criminal organizations is the long-term solution.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired. I want to point out that one of the crises, just show you how tough it is, to hold court, you've got to hide the identity of the judge because they not only assassinate judges, they assassinate families. And I'm going to make a public statement. I think the Merida Initiative should bring young people in from the central part of Mexico and the south, bring them into the United States. We train them here. We keep them here until they go do their be able to do their operations. Because as soon as you identify them in Mexico, their family, and they are at risk, and as soon as you leave them long periods of time in that environment, they're susceptible for influence by the cartels. And so if, as a layman who's worked on criminal justice issues along the border a long time, I think we need to be serious about bringing these young men into the United States, train them, keep them here, and allow them to do their job in Mexico when they need to be done, but protect them and their families while they're doing those jobs. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And let me just, being we are running out of time here, we have to go vote. What can we do, to assist you in making certain that you're very successful in your endeavors? What can the Congress do? In other words, let's switch roles for a moment.
Well, sir, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the question. I think the first thing that all the witnesses at this table would have to say is that we support the President's budget. But clearly, resource constraints are an issue that face us. With $1.4 billion over 3 years projected in the Merida Initiative to assist the governments of Mexico and Central America, there has been relatively little spent on the domestic side of this equation to help the U.S. agencies that must work with them. We are doing the best that we can to prioritize our resources and work within the existing budget constraints, but it's difficult to increase the operational tempo of our foreign counterparts without a corresponding ability to do something on the United States side.
You want to comment on the lack of jail space?
Outside of my bailiwick, sir.
Anybody want to comment on that? Okay, for the record, I mean, we're grossly deficient where we've got to choose winners and losers, and this is not a time to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hearing.
Well, thank you very much. And just quickly for the record, DEA and ICE, you guys getting along now? I cannot.
Yes, we are, sir.
We purposely put you together. Thank you very much.
So you're not deporting his mother? That's nice of you.
Let me just say, first of all, that completes the questioning of the panel. And, of course, I would like to give the members an opportunity to put their opening statements in the record without objection, so ordered. Let me just thank all of you witnesses and members who attended this hearing today. Please let the record demonstrate my submission of a binder with the documents relating to this hearing. And without objection, I enter this binder into the committee records. And without objections, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.